RYA courses and qualifications. From beginners to professionals, with more than 100 courses to choose from, there's something for everyone. Visit rya.org.uk to learn more. You're listening to the RYA 150 podcast, hosted by record-breaking British yachtswoman Dee Caffari, marking 150 years of sailing heritage and future inspiration.
Emily Penn is a sailor, an ocean advocate, an artist, and a founder of an exploration company called Expedition. She's a pioneering ocean advocate, initiatives that involve female organisations, and it's really shaping our future. She really has done everything, and I'm delighted to be talking about her and to her because I know Emily really well and we cross paths quite often. And so it's lovely to have you on the podcast, Emily. Thank you for joining us.
It's great to be here. Thanks, Dee.
But your career is exceptional, and we're going to cover little aspects of that because you're more than happy on a boat. You're more than happy putting your body under the microscope. And then the next step, you're talking to government officials. You really do have that wide range of capacity. But what I want to do is start this story at that complete light bulb moment, that moment where I've read you were scuba diving quite happily in your own little world, and you were faced with items that should not have been in the ocean, that literally kind of did the seismic shift in your career and kind of propelled you on the trajectory that we know you for today. Take us back to that moment. Where were you? What were you doing? What did you see? And what happened inside you to make this change?
Absolutely. I was in the middle of the Pacific, and the reason I was there is because I trained as an architect, and I had this job lined up in Australia, and I wanted to get there from England without taking an aeroplane. And I wanted to go by boat. I wanted to cross the Atlantic and cross the Pacific. So my headspace at the time was to go off and design buildings and have that successful architecture career that I thought I wanted. I just wanted to have an adventure getting there. So there I was in the middle of the Pacific. We, had been at sea for days and days and days, not seeing land, not seeing any other person. We jump into the water, and we were actually having a wash at the time because there was no running water on board. So we had to jump over the side, and there was plastic, a cigarette lighter, a bottle top, a toothbrush. And I think at that moment, I sort of looked around thinking, well, where's this come from? There must be a ship nearby. There must be an explanation. But there wasn't. There was no one near. In fact, there was no one for another 800 miles. And we carried on going across the Pacific. And every time we stopped for a swim, every island that we visited, often uninhabited atolls, we found that they were covered in plastic instead of sand. And at the time, this was 2008, this is not something that you could Google, not something that people were talking about. So it just seems so extraordinary that I thought, wow, this is something that people need to know about and it needs to be fixed.
And it's fascinating that miles from anywhere, with your intention on one road, it took you along a completely different path. And you talk about going to atolls and isolated communities. You made seismic change in one of those communities, and I love this story, so I really want you to share it. Like the fact that you kind of put yourself in amongst the community and actually made massive change happen there.
Yeah, so I ended up, we passed through Tonga, and I just couldn't believe that these islands that these locals, these kids were living on, they were just covered in plastic. They were burning the plastic because they had no landfill. They had nowhere else for it to go. And I was getting that smell of burning plastic up my nose on all of these islands. And really that was probably the moment when I thought, I need to postpone my architecture career. I'll go back to it later and focus on this island instead. So I stayed living in Tonga. for 6 months, living with the local community. I got taken in by a family. There were 22 of us living in the household. This sort of village elder, he had lots of daughters a similar age to me, and we all slept on mats on the floor with pigs and chickens all running around. It was a kind of full immersion. But it was great because I had somewhere to live, I had food to eat, and it meant that I owned my time. Every day I could get up and I could just work on the next thing that I felt needed to happen to tackle the plastic issue on this island. And at the same time was building great relations in the community, particularly with all these daughters who I then spent a lot of time with, and I think it really sort of helped then the success of the project, because so much of that project ended up being ran by the community, and we ended up setting up this community-led cleanup where we had 3,000 people, which was actually 3/4 of the island population, and together we came up and picked 56 tons of plastic off the shore in just 5 hours. I mean, a
Scary
amount, to begin with. And that was the kind of culmination of that 6 months of work.
And you've been in the middle of the ocean to get somewhere for something else. You've now ingratiated yourself in a community, and you talked about spending a lot of time with the daughters of the elder. Were these influences something that kind of were helping form expedition that you run, that's known for putting female communities together to go and make action happen?
It's funny, I'd never thought of the angle of spending all that time with the women on that island, but certainly all of those experiences, I think particularly crossing an ocean for a start, and how transformative that was for me. My life was never the same again. I'm still 15, however many years later, not an architect, and I never will be, because it completely changed the course of my life. And so a big reason for setting up X Expedition was to give other people that opportunity, and people who aren't sailors. They're not like you going off around the world, and a lot of your colleagues, they're not scientists necessarily. They are people who want to make a difference. The ocean seems completely inaccessible to them, and we give them an opportunity to go across the ocean to really see these issues firsthand. And so I think that journey, around the world was absolutely a trigger for that way of creating change that I kind of came across. The all women aspect was a combination of things. One was being surrounded by so many incredible women, I think, on that journey, the early days of that journey. Perhaps it started there on the island in Tonga, and then continued as I started to meet more scientists tackling the plastic issue, other people, so many really strong women. Also, though, one of the triggers was actually when I had my own blood tested.
I was going to ask about that because it leads so neatly onto it, because the female aspect is one thing with the scientists and the sailors and joining it all together, but actually the plastic research you did was quite, kind of specific for female hormones and the blood work. So, I mean, the fact that you put your body to medical science literally blows my mind, and the results is what gets me. So tell us all about that.
I know, perhaps when I did it, I wasn't expecting the results that now we know. And maybe if I'd have thought that might have been the case, I might have thought twice about doing it. But, I did this blood test. We'd been out there, we'd been seeing the plastic in the ocean, we'd been sampling it, discovering that the plastic was actually these tiny little microplastics. We then started catching fish. We were finding plastic in the stomach of the fish as well. And this is what led me to that question around, well, if the plastic is getting into the fish, into the food chain, then could that be getting into us as well? And what about all of these other nasty chemicals that are used in that plastic? Where are they going? And so I did this blood test. It was part of a United Nations study where we looked at 35 chemicals that are all banned by the UN because they're toxic to humans. And of those 35 chemicals, we found 29 of them in my blood. And these are things like flame retardants, often used on our upholstery, our curtains, to stop things combusting. So useful chemicals, but chemicals that when they get in our body, they're toxic and they're persistent. Other ones that you won't want to hear about are fluorinated compounds that are all over our wet weather gear, which of course we wouldn't be out there without our Fowlies. But the reason that they're so effective is because they've got these chemicals on them that repel water. That aren't good when they're in. Anyway, so all these different types of chemicals. And then the more I learned about the impact of them in our bodies is that actually for us women during pregnancy, when we're breastfeeding, you know, that they're just bad chemicals to have. They inhibit hormones, and can pass them on as well to our children. And that's when I thought, why not tackle this issue of plastic and chemical pollution with an amazing team of women? An Expedition was born.
It's like really serendipitous, but I mean, that scares the hell out of me thinking of how much exposure we all have. You know, everyday people probably have a high number of these toxins in their body. Have you had your blood tested since?
I haven't since. It's actually really hard to do. There was this study going on in 2014 that we were part of. I did it once more in 2015 and it was similar. Since then, I've actually had 2 children. I'm kind of curious, but also maybe don't want to know how that's had an impact. You know, have the chemicals gone up over the years or actually have they gone down because I've passed them on? It's very hard right now to do it. There's very little testing. It's very expensive. There's not many labs. There's a lot of people out there who actually don't want to know, you know, particularly industry, really about what impact this might be having.
And have you found that? Because when you have hard evidence, it's very hard for them to ignore you and brush you aside because you have a voice and you have facts. And this is what your research does, isn't it? It actually resonates in facts so you can go and help make a difference.
Yeah, and actually I think I'm feeling this quite strongly right now. I've just got back from Geneva for the 5th negotiation of the Plastics Treaty that was just happening a couple of weeks ago. And you might have seen in the news, it collapsed. And this was supposed to be the second last, as in there was already the last event last year and it didn't happen. And this was the second attempt at the last negotiation to make it happen. And it was, I was fairly shocked by how the scientists were there providing the facts and the evidence, and yet still were decisions were being made in the opposite direction for other agendas. And so, you know, yes, it's great that we can get the fact, we need to get the facts, and that's why the majority of countries are on board with what needs to happen. But it was incredible to see in the last few weeks that there are also, you know, the facts can just be completely disregarded. And that's where we need to go a step even further than science. And it's about inspiring people and it's about getting that political will to actually do something because it's the right thing.
Well, you're definitely the perfect person for that with what you've done. And you've been everywhere from the Arctic to the Pacific Islands to, you know, the scientific breakthroughs. What's your kind of standout thing that you've seen or achieved? Because, you know, your experience now is so vast. You know, what to you is, apart from a toothbrush in the Pacific or Tonga and living there, you know, for you, what's your, this moment is the story I always tell because it's amazing.
Be part of a worldwide community of over 100,000 people and enjoy exclusive benefits while protecting the activities we love. RYA membership, your route to expert advice. Become a member today.
A moment. The direction that question was going, I was thinking for me, it's the community, I think is what the bit.
Okay, nice.
You know, I'm a real people person. I might do the science and do the sailing, but for me, it's all just a means for taking people and showing people and having other people have that aha moment and then seeing what they can go on and do, using their, what I like to call superpower, you know, the thing that they're brilliant at, the opportunity that they have. And I think for me, there's probably those little moments are when someone WhatsApps me to say, you know, someone who's been on the boat and has been on an expedition, and then they tell me something that they've done back home. You know, they've managed to finally close down the landfill on their little island in the Caribbean because they've set up this, completely closed loop economy with the government, or they've quit their job and they've got a new one with a company that's doing something much more ethical, or they've set up their own company or their own local business. It's all these little bits like that that make me feel like it's really making a difference and it's really making an impact. So I don't know if that's what you were looking for, but that for me,
Yeah.
I think, is the little moments that really feel like it's all worth it.
That's nice, as you say, because you do these things and it almost feels in isolation, but actually down the line, the knock-on effect and the reach is
Mm.
far greater than you first think. I mean, we know you for being the explorer, being the sailor, putting your body under the knife, but actually and you're perfect as a communicator. Your TEDx talks, and as you say, sat in the UN, your reach is quite far. When you're stood in front of world leaders, what is your key message of advocacy? What are you kind of champing down? I know it's probably fine tuned depending who the audience is and who you want to kind of get on board, but what are you banging your drum about?
Yeah, I think it's that firstly, that there's no silver bullet to tackle the plastic issue. I think sometimes we try too hard to find this amazing solution that doesn't yet exist, and then all the problems are going to be solved. And I think my big message is that actually we're never going to find a silver bullet because we use plastic for everything. And we need to find solutions that cover all of those different uses. And if we tried to come up with one new solution, we just create another big problem. And the good news is that there are already hundreds of solutions. We don't need to find them, we've already got them. It's just a case of implementing them. And to do this, we need people from all different skills and backgrounds. It's not just up to one particular industry or sector to lead on this, but actually whoever we are, wherever we live, and particularly the people in power, they all have a different role to play and an opportunity to make a difference. So I think my main message, it's really just saying, let's do it. We don't need to wait for more innovation or more technology. And also, in a way, it's not that hard. Humans are extraordinary. We've put a man on the moon. We've sailed around the world. We've gone to the depths of our ocean. We have done extraordinary things. I mean, look at tech and AI, and it boggles my mind to even think about how it's achieved. Some of these other problems, they're not actually that hard. A lot of it is just remembering to take your reusable shopping bag to the shops. And so it's really about just simplifying it down and saying so much of solving these problems is actually just simple steps and, something that we can all do today.
It's really interesting there you say simple steps, because for me, when I'm having conversations, and as you say, I think we have a very different perspective when you're seeing the middle of the world's ocean, which most people don't get to see, and you're seeing the effects even there. You realize there's a big problem and you talk about it, and then people make it so complex and it becomes too difficult or too big a problem and they don't know where to start. So it's really interesting that you're saying that actually it's very simple.
it is when you even in the middle of the ocean, it's a toothbrush. That toothbrush was once in someone's bathroom. It was once inside their mouth. It's so personal. It's such an
Yeah.
individual thing. And there was an action that happened that allowed that toothbrush to eventually find its way out into the middle of the ocean. And it is also a simple action that can reverse it. And what I don't want to do, though, is kind of belittle the role of the governments and industry here. I'm not saying it's all on people, individuals, but I am saying that everyone at every level of this decision making is an individual, is a person, and we have a different sphere of influence. And I also think for industry and for government, they do know that the solutions are there, but it is a case of making a decision. It's a will to do something, and a belief that it's going to have an impact. And what they have to do isn't actually that hard. It just comes at a cost that at
That's the
moment,
thing, isn't it? It's a cost of a change of habit or a financial commitment.
Yeah.
And so now in 2025, as the mother of two, what gives you hope today that things are moving in the right direction? And what are you, in contrast to that, what are you most worried about?
I think that the hopeful bit is just that I think where things were in 2008, you couldn't even Google plastic pollution. Now you can't find anyone on the planet that doesn't know plastic pollution is a problem. It's changed significantly. So we have awareness, and that's amazing. And there feels like a real drive to make things happen. The challenge that we have, and maybe what I'm worried about, is really turning that awareness into action, and can we do it fast enough? Because particularly when we look at the impact on the climate, just in the last couple of years, things have changed significantly. And I think we've gone in the last 2 years on the climate front from there being this trend and a concern about what's going to happen to then actually starting to see us hit record after record after record after record in quite a scary way. And the changes in sea temperature, in currents and things, it feels like we're reaching that point where at some point there's going to be a point of no return. And we'll get these kind of runaway effects in nature where things will just get worse and worse quite quickly. So that's really what scares me, and it definitely scares me having two little ones and thinking about what their life will be like when they're my age. But I think I'm inherently optimistic, and because I see the solutions exist, I feel like we are going to solve this. We just need to do it quickly.
Yeah, time is not on our side anymore. It feels that everything's accelerating. We talk
Yes.
about we've had a lovely summer weather, but actually the impact of that summer weather is quite scary as well. So it's hard to enjoy the good bits of what we have and
Yeah,
realize the impact it's having.
absolutely. We keep calling it a heat wave, and I think now we just need to call it new summer, because it's just how it is now. And that, yeah, it's a great illustration of how much things have changed. And it might feel nice for those few moments of extra sunshine, but yeah, the knock-on effect of the drought and the effect on our crops, and then what we experience at other times of the year of flooding and stronger winds and things. It's all exaggerated, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely in the extreme and all aspects. And for our listeners who are sailors, day-to-day people, listening to somebody of your stature doing extreme things in the topic, what can they do? They want to make a difference, but, for them, they're just one person. How do they make a difference?
It's really about asking yourself what's your superpower. And maybe that sounds like you're a superhero, and you're like, well, I'm not a superhero. But we all have something that makes us brilliant, that makes us unique, whether it's, we love chemistry and we want to go on and design maybe some better chemicals to go on our foul weather gear that aren't persistent in the environment. That's one thing that we could do. Maybe we're really good at making Instagram videos that go viral, and we can talk about some of these issues and talk about the things that we want to do about them. Maybe it's just looking at our own consumption in our house. Have a look in your bin, in your kitchen, in your bathroom. Those are the two places where you'll probably find the most single-use plastic. Try and get rid of half of that plastic by making different choices. And if you think, oh, but what about my toothpaste? But what about, there's honestly a solution out there. Everyone has thought of all of those things. And there is a way to do it now, plastic free. So your own consumption, but also what wider thing can you contribute based on your skill, based on what it is that you love to do. And, beyond that, I know we're here to sort of talk about careers, and just thinking about how you can choose a career that really does make a difference, because it's not only important, but I think it's really fulfilling, and it's something that you could go on to share with others, get excited about, And as time goes on, as we've discussed, it's only going to be more and more important that we're all doing meaningful careers that make a difference and really help move the trajectory that we're on at the moment to a much better place.
Something for all of us to think about for sure. And you talk about, we're talking about careers. Obviously, your intention was to be in architecture. And it's interesting that, that never got a look in once you did your little, I'm just going to take a bit of time out, and it never came back. But with a background in architecture, it must have an influence in possibly the way you think about problem solving or the way you think about how you're going to deliver the new research or the findings that you make or how you communicate with your audience. What are the things that you can take from architecture into where you are today?
Yeah, definitely. Really, really good question. And I still think if I could turn back the time, I would have still done an architecture degree.
Interesting.
Yeah, I would have never ever changed that. And anyone thinking about it out there, go do it, because it's like you've already said it, problem solving. My degree, hilariously, although I probably shouldn't admit this, I managed to get through a 3-year degree without actually reading a book because it was
Everyone's going to want to know how and why.
everyone's going to want to do. But the degree was all about creating something. You got given a brief, design a building to go in this place for this type of person, to do this type of activity, and you had to come up with it. You couldn't find it in a book. You had to solve the problem. You had to go and assess the site. You had to think about everything else that was going on around it. You had to think about the environment. You had to think about all of the different uses, how you'd move around the building, endless things that you had to consider. And then you had to create something, kind of out of thin air, and put it there and build it. And then you had to be able to communicate it. And you had to build models, you had to draw drawings, and you had to be able to talk about it. And all of those skills are so useful for what I do today. I feel like I'm constantly having to solve problems. And whether it's thinking about the bigger problem of our planet, and all of the different opposing forces and agendas that need to be taken into consideration when solving it, or whether it's just solving the problem of we're going on an expedition and something's happened that we have to suddenly spring on. I mean, Dee, you're the queen of solving problems on your own in the middle of nowhere with no resource. And it's the same sort of thing. You're always having to think creatively and outside the box to fix something. And so, in that respect, the degree was perfect. And also the bit about communicating your ideas and trying to convince other people that this is the solution that should be built on the site, was part of that job. And the same now, you're constantly trying to convince people that, we need to do something and that this is the answer. So I wouldn't have changed it for a second. And I really think I wouldn't be where I am today, even if I'd studied environmental sciences or something else. Not because it's not a good thing to study. If you're a scientist and you like the environment, for sure, go and study environmental sciences. But it wasn't the right thing for me because I'm not a pure scientist. I actually want to be solving problems and communicating. And that's why it was the right degree for me. So I'm a big believer that if you follow your passion, you follow what you're good at, you work out your superpower, work out what is that thing that really makes you tick and really lights you up. If you go off in that direction, you'll always succeed because
I like that. So many transferable skills, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think any degree would be like that. You'd find those transferable skills because if you do the thing that you love and that you're good at, then you'll work hard at it, you'll do well at it, and you'll develop quicker and further, and then you'll move on into the next thing. Whereas if you go and do something you don't enjoy or you're not very good at, you just sort of don't have the motivation to carry on and you sort of hit a dead end. So think if you can follow your passion, so you're always going to end up in the right place.
Or you end up doing lots of crazy things like the pair of us know all too well. And talking of passions, you then had your transference over into sailing, and you did more and more sailing, having travelled across to Australia by boat because that was your passion. And you went through the RYA Yachtmaster scheme because in 2010 you actually got the prestigious recognition of Yachtmaster of the Year. Can you remember doing your Yachtmaster?
I do. I did it in Falmouth. It was freezing cold in the middle of winter, and I'd just come back from the Caribbean or somewhere, and I thought, what am I doing? But no, it was great. I think it was, I perhaps did it slightly differently, and that I went and did just a lot of time on boats and then came home and got my yachtmaster qualification quite quickly, rather than starting out with the intention of doing my yachtmaster and building up my sea time and doing lots of courses, just because of the way it panned out for me.
So it's a little bit like taking your driving test, having driven for, every time you're in a car, you're the one driving. You're very confident because you've got the experience of being on the road.
Exactly. But also having never had a lesson, which is then a bit bizarre, because I think you then have to sort of try and then learn some of the theory that perhaps, you hadn't come across that situation in the past, and then learn about it in case it comes up in the future. So a slightly backwards way of doing it. But it was great to come back to do the yachtmaster, and then of course that opened up completely new doors and opportunities for me, because up until that point I'd very much been a deckhand. I'd been on board, I'd obviously been focusing on the science and the storytelling and things, being very hands-on the boat, but not in any kind of significant leadership role. So being able to come back, do my yachtmaster, also professionally, it opened up then doors that I could actually go out. I could be a paid skipper, and and then also just take on that full skippering role as well.
And talking of that, so you've got your qualification, you have this vision, and you put people on a boat, and you're now in charge of that boat, but you're also in charge of the whole project. Like, how was that responsibility, and how did you manage that? Did you struggle to start with? Because that's responsibility for the people, the boat, and the project.
Yeah, in honesty, it's too much. It's funny you say, did you struggle to start with? I think almost I did it without thinking. Maybe because it was just had the momentum, and it was just the next logical thing to do. And it was only after doing it a few times that I then thought, okay, actually, this is too much. Also, I think the project was getting bigger and bigger, the profile, the media, all of the other parts of the job were becoming much bigger.
And there's only one of you.
Exactly. And so at that point, I got someone else to come in and skipper the boat so that I could then focus on the other aspects of the project. And that is always now how I'll continue to do it.
And talking of continuing, there's news, isn't there? There's a plan. We're going to see X Expedition again.
There is, yeah, a very exciting plan.
Can you tell us?
I should have checked when this is going to be broadcast, but yes, I'll tell you. We are getting back on the water is the big news. After 5 years of not sailing, we had to stop due to COVID. We had to abandon the boat in the middle of the Pacific, in Tahiti, when everything all shut down. And then I went on to have the 2 little ones, and it just hasn't been the right time to get it all started again. But now it is. The world is opened up. I'm raring to go again. And so April next year, we will set sail again and be running voyages all over the world, back out there, studying plastic pollution, so doing a combination of the scientific research, going out and assessing how things have changed over the years, but also really focusing on trying to stitch together the land and the sea, an area where there hasn't been much research to date, and trying to really understand more about the sources of the plastic out there so that we can have the best solutions implemented on land. So more evidence really to back up and support where the solutions are needed.
That's really interesting. I'm going to interrupt just because quite often when you're in a landlocked location and you talk to them about plastic in the sea, they don't see it as their problem because they're not near the sea. Mm-hmm. And it's really interesting to explain that connection that everybody has with the ocean.
Yeah.
And you stand in the road next to a storm drain and kind of go, look, where do you think this goes? And it's really interesting that connecting it to everybody, because we're all connected to the ocean somewhere, somehow.
Exactly. Yeah. We all have an impact on the ocean. And then, a nice way of explaining it is also how we also enjoy the benefits of the ocean wherever we live, even in the middle of a continent. every other breath we take is coming from the sea, from the phytoplankton in the ocean that's producing over half of the oxygen in the air that we breathe. So we all can have a negative impact on it, but we also get to enjoy the amazing benefits a healthy ocean brings us too, which I think is important for everyone to really grasp and understand. But yeah, so we'll be back out there with lots of opportunities basically to get on the water, even without any sailing experience. I mean, of course, it's great if you do have sailing experience, because we always need a few people on board who are able to help the professional crew. But if you don't, it's a really great way to get into it, to be really hands-on on the sailing, but also to go through this experience of doing the hands-on science, the workshops, the talks, the sessions that we have on board, where really you can leave one of these trips 1 or 4 weeks later, an expert on the issue, able to take that back home to your community, to your workplace, and do something extraordinary.
And the scientists that are supporting the work, where, the research you get, the data you get, where does it go? Like who gets to see it, and what difference does it make?
Yeah, so we're working with Dr. Jenna Jambeck at the University of Georgia, for the majority of the work that we're doing. And that feeds into a much bigger study that they're working on globally, where they're gathering similar data. So that really helps then with comparisons, and you can see which countries are doing well on certain things, where the challenges are, and then you can adopt other solutions, and just gives us a lot more options for really understanding cause and then also solution. So she will sort of house all of that data centrally. We're looking at various ways that we communicate it through maps. There will be papers published. Ultimately, we're going to be getting it into the hands of governments and businesses, the people who need this data to make good decisions about the future of our planet. And there's still not enough really that's being, in their hands, enough compelling evidence that means they can feel like they can make the right decisions. I'd probably argue that they do have enough, but
they're always going to ask for more, right? Because they're going to put their neck on the line for it.
I think at the moment we have a plenty of evidence that shows what's going on. What we need a bit more of is really local specific evidence. And so a big part of what we're doing, going all around the world now to specific places, is to really be able to gather that very localized evidence, that really can be used, that there's no wriggling out of, that it's right.
And for you, as as your career progresses, as you say, you were trained as an architect, you got hit in the face by the issue of plastic, you loved being at sea, and then you combine the two, and now you speak and you influence. Where do you sit? Because I'm sure you're not leaving your 2 little ones at home and being on a boat doing all the cruises. If people sign up for an X expedition, they're not going to be on board with you necessarily. So where's your role now in your career progression?
Yeah, so absolutely. My role is definitely now at home, I'd say, for the next little while, for sure. Not that I won't go on any of these trips, but majority I won't. Luckily, there's lots of other fantastic people in our network who are raring to go. So most of our mission leaders, who are going to be the people actually on board leading the expeditions, the science and the program, they're people who've been on an expedition in the past, and blew me away by how incredible they were. And so we're now kind of handpicking through our network for those people. And then skippers as well, as the support professional team. So, a really, really great team of people who are going to be out there leading these trips, which makes me feel great about being able to stand behind them, and support them, while they're out there. And I'll be back at HQ solving problems as they arise, no doubt. And
probably working just as hard, even though you may be at home.
Yeah. And steering the direction, feeding in new thoughts, new tweaks to the program, new evolutions of it as things shift and the whole thing evolves. I think that, when I was an architecture student, I went off around the world, I saw the problem, I ended up in Tonga. I thought I would maybe have a gap year I would just do it for a year and then I go back to my career. But the reason that this issue has just gripped me for so long is how it's constantly shifting and changing. And it keeps showing me a new face. First the science, it was these islands of plastic that we heard about. We went out there. Actually, they weren't islands. It was a soup. It was this microplastic. Then it was getting into the fish, into the food chain, into our bodies. There was a whole toxic story to explore. And then it's about solutions. It's about getting people out there. It's about building this incredible army of amazing women from all over the world who are going to be the ones that create the change. It's feeding the science into government. It's working with business on the roles that they can play. There's just no end to the different things. And I want to make sure that we do keep on evolving as an organization and that we're constantly working on the front line of what needs to happen next. So that's very much, I think, going to be my role going forward, is just keeping on pushing to do it better and to create more impact any way we can.
And to get a bigger reach, I guess the further you reach, the more impact you can have.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And is it staying on the female focus, or are you open to blend?
Yeah, good question. It is for now, and partly because I want to relaunch, keeping as much the same as we can while we just get going again, and get things built up. We are scaling, so it is going to be different, and we're running things slightly differently in terms of our model. So there's enough change happening already. I'm not ruling out opening it up. But initially when we relaunch, it is going to be all women.
Powerful. But as you say, 50% of the population, you might have an army of men wanting to get on board with the same fight. So,
Exactly.
at some point they're going to want to be allowed on board.
Yeah, for sure.
And, you've looked at various locations and you've mentioned a few locations. Where do you think is the biggest problems lie across the globe as far as you're concerned?
On plastic.
Yeah.
And it's a mix. So there's the gyres, these accumulation zones, and they're between 20 and 40 degrees latitude, north and south of the equator. So you end up with 5 of these gyres, 2 in the Atlantic, 2 in the Pacific, and 1 in the Indian Ocean. And they're by far the areas that we find the most dense samples of these microplastic fragments. They're totally ingrained in marine life. They're the same size as the algae and the zooplankton and everything else. Really, really extraordinarily hard to clean up. There's also what's going on beneath those. We know now that the plastic's sinking, going down to the depths. We can't even get down there really to measure what's going on, let alone thinking about cleaning up or the impact. So there's those very remote places. And then there's other places around the world that really struggle with waste management. So it might be a really small island where you haven't got enough stuff going through your system to be able to financially support a good waste management system. We did work a couple of years ago in Maldives, which is a classic example, spread over hundreds of islands, which is logistically very expensive to move anything around. And so you're not going to spend a lot of money moving rubbish that has no value. And classic of most islands in the world, like Tonga and the Pacific as well. And then there's other countries, that are much bigger, but just, aren't just sort of too poor really to be able to put their precious government funding, that they do manage to have into waste management, because they're dealing with fresh water and starvation and things that just do come higher up the list than rubbish. So it varies around the world based on economics and geography. Really one of the big ways that we're going to solve this is through something like a treaty, where we are getting the richer countries to help pay for waste management around the world, for reducing production of plastic in the first place, and alternatives being then more widely rolled out so that everyone in the world then has access to them. Extended producer responsibility, this idea that actually it's the company that's making the product that should be responsible for paying for its recovery wherever it ends up going in the world, and that shouldn't be a cost on the government, aka the people of the country, to be footing that bill. And these were a lot of the contentious points in the treaty that were being negotiated in Geneva the last couple of weeks. that there isn't global agreement on, that will really help solve the inequality around the world.
So does that mean 2026 we've got the third last discussion on the treaty?
Potentially, although there has been some conversation just saying that it's just not working the way it's set up. And at the moment, it's set up in a way where it needs consensus from every single country in the world to have a treaty in place. Whereas perhaps we need to rethink how we do it. And actually, there should be a treaty that exists, even if every country isn't signed up to it, because at least then we can start making some progress. Because to get every single country in agreement, we end up just setting the bar too low, really. And a lot of countries, UK included, don't want the bar that low. They're saying there's no point in having a treaty if it doesn't actually say anything.
Yeah, it's got to be a challenge, otherwise there's nothing to rise to.
Yeah.
Well, Emily Penn, you are the lady that will make it happen, I'm sure. And it's great to hear that X Expedition is back and going to be out on the water making a difference. I'm excited by that. And I just want to say thank you for spending time talking to us and talking about your career and how varied it's been. A word of advice, either to any young sailors that may be listening, or in fact, a word of advice to your 11-year-old self. Because I think back at 11, you had no idea you were going to have reached and done the things that you've done. So what would you say? Thinking of your two little ones growing up, what's mum going to tell them?
Oh, I was all ready for advice to others, but advice to age 11. I mean, maybe it is the same, but I think because it took me a little while to figure out. And if I'd have known it at 11, I just might have got there faster. But I think my biggest bit of advice I would also give my children is, as they grow up, is to really think about what it is that they can offer when they want something in the world. And the reason I think focus on this one is because I suspect there's quite a lot of people listening who are game for an adventure. They're sailors. They love the ocean, love the planet, wanting to get out there, and quite possibly wanting to do something extraordinary, wanting to have an amazing career, and wanting to have an incredible adventure and make an impact. And so when you're thinking about what it is that you want to do, think about what it is that you can offer someone else. If you're writing to Dee or one of her team about, getting involved, or writing to me or one of our other friends, colleagues, think about how you can say, this is what I can do. This is how I can be part of it, rather than what it is that you want, what you want from it. And it's something that I definitely kind of figured out as I went. But being able to, get my break of getting across the ocean that then led to everything, and then each of the incremental stages that followed, of myself then becoming an expert in plastic pollution without going to university. It was because I learned that from other amazing people. And I managed to get myself alongside them, close enough to absorb all of the information, ask all of the questions, and keep on, growing. And I figured out the best way to do that was to go to those people, telling them what I could do for them.
Sage advice. I like that.
So they couldn't say no. And then I was there, I was in, and then could kind of learn a bit more and then figure out the next steps. And I think for my two, I'm going to always encourage them to just put themselves out there, and just, obviously go out there with as much energy as they've got. And I already said it earlier, follow your passion, and that will always lead you to the right place. But when you're looking to kind of get ahead, make your next step, what can you give to someone else that will get you in the door? And who knows where it will lead.
Wise words from Emily Penn. So we've got to have a passion. What can we offer other people? And then we'll find our superpower. And I like that. I think we all need to find our superpower. So Emily, thank you for helping us think about our own superpowers.
Thanks, Dee.
Thank you for listening, and join me next week where we find out what it's really like behind the polished decks of a super yacht, and what it's like to coach an Olympic athlete in incredible careers, from super yachts to super racing starts.
Learning to sail or sharpening your skills? The RYA shop has everything you need, from handbooks and training guides to the latest racing rules of sailing, plus ebooks and audiobooks you can take anywhere. Visit rya.org.uk/shop and set course for your next adventure.